Good evening, travelers of the modern world, wanderers of Wi-Fi kingdoms and warriors of the blankets. I greet you with a bow so low it nearly bumps my medieval helmet into the wooden table beside me. And before we slip quietly into another long night inside a frost-bitten medieval village, I must ask the ancient question that all storytellers crave to know. From what corner of this vast spinning globe are you listening tonight? And what time is it where your lantern still glows? If you wish, leave your answer in the comments below, because it always warms my medieval peasant heart to see night owls from every land gathering around the same digital fire. And if the journey we take tonight pleases you even a little, I would be honored if you tapped the like button with the gentle grace of a monk turning a parchment page, and maybe even subscribed, but only if you truly enjoy these sleepy wanderings through the past. And now, as the candles flicker lower and the night grows deeper, let us lift the heavy wooden latch of time and step softly into the story, drawing the door closed behind us so the cold doesn't follow. You find yourself walking along a narrow lane at the edge of a medieval village where snow lies thick on the roofs like wool blankets pulled up by hands older than memory, and your breath rises in slow, gentle clouds that sparkle under a pale moon, as if tiny shards of winter glass drift upward instead of down, every sound muted except for the soft crunch beneath your boots and the distant bark of a restless dog that cannot decide whether to guard the night or surrender to sleep. The houses lean toward one another like gossiping old friends trying to keep secrets from the wind, and frost clings to every doorway in delicate white patterns that look almost like silver frames surrounding the fragile lives within. When you push gently on a crooked wooden door and step inside a modest cottage, the rafters are low enough to make you bow your head, the air warm but thin, and the family gathered around the small fire turns only briefly to see you enter before returning to their quiet evening routine, because winter teaches them that every ember must be watched and every crumb must be counted. A wooden board balanced on uneven legs serves as a table, and in the center rests a dark loaf of bread so dense you imagine it could break a tooth if bitten too boldly. Yet it is precious, almost sacred, because grain is not flavor here. Grain is survival, the simple line between another sunrise and another worry. You watch the father slice the bread slowly, each movement deliberate, and the heavy smell of rye and barley fills the small room with something earthy and honest, something that feels as old as the soil itself. The youngest child holds a wooden spoon as if it were a treasure, dipping it into a pot of thin gruel that simmers with more hope than flavor. A mixture stretched with water and perhaps the tiniest pinch of salt if the family has been fortunate this season. Historians like to argue whether medieval peasants hated their black bread or simply accepted it with quiet resignation. But as you chew the piece offered to you, sour, smoky, rugged, you understand that taste matters little when winter presses hard against the door. Outside, the wind sighs against the cottage walls, and inside parents count the weeks left until the thaw in silent glances, measuring supplies with the sort of practiced arithmetic born from generations that knew hunger, not as a visitor, but as a shadow that never fully leaves. You sit near the fire, its crackling glow soft and hypnotic, and you feel your eyelids grow heavy as the rhythm of their world settles around you. A world where bread is lifeblood, porridge is ritual, and every humble meal becomes a small act of defiance against the cold. You drift into a shallow, flickering sleep beside their hearth, and when you open your eyes again it is morning, the kind of winter morning where the light that seeps through the tiny window seems tired before it even begins, pale and thin and already defeated by the frost that flowers along the wooden frame. And when you breathe out, you see your own breath cloud in front of you, even though you are still inside, a reminder that the fire can blunt the cold but never quite banish it. The family moves slowly in this grey half-light, shoulders hunched inside rough wool, and the first motion of the day is not toward the door or the fields, but toward the table where the bread waits like a small dark stone placed carefully on a wooden board. The loaf is nothing like the soft slices you know from the modern world. It is heavy and compact, with a crust so hard you could knock on it as if it were a door, and expect it to answer. And when the father cuts into it, the knife does not glide, but pushes and grinds, sawing through a crumb that is grey and coarse, and flecked with bits of husk that scratch the tongue as much as they feed the belly. Here in this small cottage, and in thousands like it scattered across medieval Europe, bread is not a side or a treat or something to be dipped into sauces for pleasure. It is the centre of gravity around which every other part of life turns, the thing that supplies most of their energy and quietly announces their social place in the world. The nobles in the manor can afford fine white wheat bread, light as a sigh, while peasants like this family live on rye, barley, and oats packed into dark loaves that mimic the soil they came from, dense, resilient, unforgiving. They bless the loaf in silence, the father tracing a quick sign over it, the knife moving with priest-like care because every slice must be measured with the precision of a tax collector and the tenderness of a parent, and as each piece is handed out, you can feel an invisible calculation. How much is left? How many days until the next market? How long until the remaining grain must be ground into flour? Butter is rare, cheese rarer, and so the bread goes down mostly plain, softened only by thin ale, and while your modern mind whispers that you couldn't live long on such monotony, these people do, day after day, month after month, sometimes padding the dough with peas or chestnuts, or even a little acorn flour in leaner years, anything that can be ground and stretched and baked into something that tricks the stomach into believing it has been honored rather than merely pacified. Later, when you step outside into the brittle light and walk along the lane, you pass the low building that serves as the communal bakehouse for the village, its walls sooted, its doorway blackened by years of smoke. Inside, the great oven breathes out warmth like a sleeping animal, and you see loaves cooling on rough planks, each one marked with a simple sign, a cross, a letter, a pattern cut into the dough, so that every family can recognize its own when the baking is done. The sight is strangely moving, row upon row of dark, hard bread, each loaf an insurance policy against hunger, each mark a reminder that food is shared, and yet still fiercely personal, that survival is both a communal act and a private worry. To break bread here is to enter into a kind of quiet contract with everyone around you, companions, literally those with whom you share bread. By the time you return to another cottage, the bread has already done its morning duty, and the day's second anchor is taking its place over the fire. A pot of porridge bubbles on an iron hook, the steam rising in ribbons that carry the simple smell of warm grain through the small room, filling every corner with a kind of humble promise. The woman of the house stirs the mixture patiently, scraping the thickening oats and barley from the sides so they don't burn, and when she lifts the spoon you can see the texture, gritty, speckled, earnest, dotted with tiny husks that your teeth will find even if your eyes don't. Sometimes there is a pinch of salt, sometimes a trickle of honey if fortune has smiled and bees have been kind, but on most days it is just grain and water, and maybe a little leftover bread torn and dropped in, so that nothing, absolutely nothing, is wasted. You watch the children gather with their wooden spoons, their eyes bright despite the dimness of the room, and as they eat you can feel the shape of their winter life taking form inside that bowl, the same taste again and again day after day, not because anyone is unimaginative, but because repetition is what keeps them standing when the wind hits and the work calls. Some historians will later debate how varied these porridges really were, whether peas and beans and roots found their way into the pot often or only in the kinder seasons, but here in front of you the argument seems pale compared to the reality, a family quietly fueling itself on something that is not exciting, not luxurious, but steady, warm and certain. You lift a spoonful to your lips and find that as it cools it becomes thicker and more stubborn, clinging to the bowl and to your ribs, wrapping a slow spreading warmth around your chest like an invisible cloak against the cold waiting outside. When the bowls are scraped clean and rinsed with a splash of precious water, you step back into the lane and follow the smell of something else that has become a daily companion in this world, ale. Not the sharp, strong beer you might imagine from tavern stories, but a cloudy, mild drink barely stronger than water, brewed at home from leftover grain, weak in alcohol but strong in purpose. In another cottage, A heavy wooden jug sits on the table at the centre of the room, and when it is poured into cups the liquid glows a dull amber grey under the firelight, giving off a sour-sweet aroma that catches in your nose. You take a sip and are surprised to find its taste gentle, almost like a bread-flavoured tea, more comforting than intoxicating. And you remember that for these villagers, ale is not a treat reserved for evenings. It is their safest way to drink throughout the day. Water, after all, can be a treacherous friend when waste seeps into wells and streams, and so even children raise small cups of watered-down ale to their lips, the bitterness softened for them, but never fully gone. The grains that made this drink have already given themselves multiple times. The first strong brew goes to the Lord or to special feasts, the second and third to households like this one, and by the time the fourth batch is poured, it is barely more than flavoured water, yet still trusted more than the pond outside with its stagnant, suspicious surface. As you watch the woman of the house tend to her brewing tub, a simple wooden vessel that smells of damp barley and smoke, you realize that this quiet, repetitive work is just as essential as any ploughing or sowing. Without it, thirst and disease would creep in as surely as the frost. Later, when the chores pause, and you follow a farmer to the edge of his fields, you see another layer of winter survival, one hidden not in barrels or sacks but in the earth itself. The fields look dead at first glance, stretches of frozen ground crusted with ice and snow. Yet near the cottage gardens the man kneels and pulls aside a thick layer of straw, revealing beneath it the pale, stubborn shapes of leeks and turnips still clinging to life. Their smell rises sharp and green against the cold air, a little reminder that the world was not always white and grey. These are not glamorous vegetables, but they are resilient, and in a winter like this, resilience is worth more than beauty. Last autumn this family dug pits in the ground, lined them with straw, filled them with carrots, cabbages and beets, then sealed them with more straw and earth, turning the soil itself into a vast, unreliable pantry. You imagine, as the farmer does now, what it feels like to go out in the biting wind and dig through frozen earth to reach these hidden stores, your fingers aching, your breath burning in your lungs, all for a handful of roots that will become the backbone of tonight's meal. Some scholars will later disagree over how varied these gardens truly were, whether peasants had an impressive variety of vegetables or a narrower range of tough survivors. But as you watch the farmer's wife chop turnips and leeks into a pot inside their cottage, the debate dissolves into the simple reality of the stew. The broth that forms around the barley and roots is thin, but its smell is deep and earthy, and when you taste it, the flavour is like eating the memory of autumn. A faint echo of green fields and full baskets carried into a season when everything outside looks empty. In a shed attached to the house you notice ropes of onions hanging from the rafters like strange golden garlands, their papery skins rustling softly when they sway in a draught, and beside them bundles of dried beans clatter gently in their pods when touched. These too are treasures, each bulb and pod a stored hour of labour from warmer days. They will find their way into countless pots, lending sharpness, strength, and a hint of variety to otherwise repetitive meals. Some of these vegetables will be eaten, some simmered into remedies, some even tied above doors to comfort anxious hearts with the feeling that the house is protected. Whether such beliefs were magic or just a way of coping hardly matters here. For this family, every rope of onions hanging overhead is both pantry and charm, both food and symbol. By the time evening falls again, and the sky outside darkens to a deep iron grey, you are back beside another hearth, and this time a different smell dominates the air. A rich, smoky tang that makes your stomach tighten with sudden, unexpected hunger. Above the fire, strips of pork and other cuts of meat hang from hooks, their surfaces dark and gleaming where salt and smoke have worked together to push decay away. And you understand at once that you are looking at the household's winter fortune. Pigs slaughtered in late autumn after being fattened on whatever scraps and acorns could be spared have been transformed into something that can survive the months ahead. Salted, smoked and stored, every piece counted, every strip a promise that some nights will be more than bread and roots alone. The mother of the house cuts a small piece, smaller than your appetite would like, and drops it into a pot already waiting with cabbage and barley. The meat is not here to dominate the meal, but to haunt it, to seep into every mouthful and make it richer than it would ever be on its own. As the fat begins to melt and drip, hissing when it hits the coals, the smell thickens and seems to wrap itself around everyone in the room, lifting their mood as surely as it will lift their energy. Children's eyes brighten at the sight of a shimmering droplet of grease floating on the stew's surface, and even the father, usually stern and reserved, allows himself a small smile as he breathes it in. Meat in this house is not taken for granted. It is a rare visitor that carries with it not only calories but morale. You sit with them as they eat that night, tearing pieces of dark bread and dipping them into the stew, chewing on morsels of salted pork that are chewy, even a bit harsh with brine, yet deeply satisfying in a way that goes beyond flavour. Outside, the wind rattles the shutters, testing the walls, but inside, the flicker of firelight on salted meat and steaming bowls feels like a kind of quiet victory. You realise as your eyes grow heavy again that winter here is not defeated in grand heroic moments, but in small, stubborn rituals, measured slices of bread, patient stirring of porridge, careful brewing of ale, slow unearthing of roots, and the occasional precious scrap of meat melting into a pot. All of it together forms a fragile shield against the cold, a shield renewed one meal at a time, one long night at a time, while the village collectively waits for the distant, almost unthinkable day when the snow finally begins to melt. You step out into the night once more, the cold brushing against your cheeks like the touch of an old familiar adversary, and as you follow the curving path toward the darker trees at the village's edge, you sense that food, precious, fragile, endlessly stretched, does not always come only from gardens and barns and salted stores. In the deepest winters, when the grain sacks grow thin and the stew pot becomes too transparent for comfort, survival sometimes slips into the forest on silent feet, cloaked in shadows and secrecy. Hunting in medieval Europe, after all, was tangled in law and privilege. The forests belonged to the lord, the game belonged to the lord, and any peasant who dared lay a snare or loose an arrow risked fines, beatings, or worse. Yet hunger is a louder authority than parchment or decree, and it is hunger that guides your steps tonight, as you crouch beside a boy checking a small hidden snare, half buried beneath the snow. The boy's breath fogs quickly in the cold as he kneels, brushing aside powdery frost to reveal the tight loop of cord, and your heart lifts slightly when you see a rabbit caught by its leg, kicking weakly in the trap. The boy moves with a mixture of hesitation and desperation, whispering a short prayer as he ends the animal's struggle, then looking over his shoulder, not toward the woods but toward the village, as if expecting the eyes of authority to materialize from the shadows. It is well recorded that such snaring was common despite punishments, though historians still debate whether poaching was a rare act of last resort desperation, or a steady, unspoken rhythm woven quietly into winter life. But as you watch the boy tuck the rabbit under his cloak and hurry home through the dark, the answer feels far less academic and far more human. Tonight that animal might mean one more warm meal, one more night of whispered gratitude that they are spared true hunger's bite. Inside the cottage, the rabbit is skinned with practiced hands, its small body transformed swiftly into an array of possibilities: meat for stew, bones for broth, hide for a pouch, sinew for thread. The smell of raw flesh is sharp in the cold air, a metallic reminder that winter's generosity often comes at a cost. The pot over the hearth fills quickly with barley, cabbage, a few herbs, and the small pieces of rabbit that now promise to turn simple sustenance into something momentarily rich. A superstition surfaces in your memory, one whispered by children in some northern villages, that eating rabbit gives you speed or luck, or that a child-fed hare might run faster come spring. Whether anyone truly believed it or simply needed to believe something hopeful during lean nights is impossible to say, but as you taste the stew later, the faint sweetness of the meat shifting through the broth, you feel a small surge of warmth that no amount of barley alone could have given. Leaving the home again, you wander toward the frozen stream, its surface shimmering with a bluish sheen under the moonlight, and you kneel to touch the ice, your knuckles tapping against it as if you were knocking on the door of a sleeping dragon. Beneath the solid crust water still murmurs, slow and muffled, and from that dark world peasants coax yet another form of winter survival. Two men approach with woven baskets, short spears and nets, their steps steady despite the treacherous footing. One chips at the ice with swift practiced blows, opening a small black mouth in the white landscape, while the other lowers a net weighted with stones, murmuring words that could be a prayer, or simply the rhythm of the work itself. Fishing beneath the ice was both necessity and obligation, especially on the many days when the church demanded abstinence from meat. You watch as one man suddenly jerks his spear upward, the tip flashing briefly before an eel writhes into the air, its glistening body twisting against the cold. Eels were a staple in many medieval regions, so abundant they were sometimes used as payment for rent or tithe, and though their appearance surprises you now, their fatty flesh made them invaluable in the winter months. Soon a carp follows, and several smaller fish are tossed into the baskets, their scales reflecting the firelight from a nearby torch like tiny frozen coins. When you return with them to the cottage that awaits these catches, the women set to work gutting and cleaning the fish, scales scattering like brittle petals across the table. The stew that forms is salty, pungent, riddled with bones that you must navigate carefully yet deeply warming. You remember reading that some villages buried barrels of fish in snowbanks to ferment during times of plenty, the resulting aroma nearly unbearable to outsiders, but a fiercely reliable source of nutrition when fresh catches were few. Taste in winter, after all, matters far less than endurance. Even a smell that makes you wince can be a blessing if it fills a pot. Moving on from the scent of fish, you find yourself stepping into another cottage, one quieter, dimmer, warmer somehow, and here you are greeted by a sight that feels gentle compared to the hunt and the frozen river. Small, precious eggs tucked under straw in a woven basket. The family's hen sits nearby, feathers puffed, eyes half closed as though guarding the last fragile remnants of sunlight from months long gone. Eggs in winter are small miracles, rare and unpredictable because chickens lay best in daylight, and daylight in midwinter is a stingy master. When the mother cracks 2 eggs into the evening pottage, the yolks glow warmly, swirling gold into the thin broth, and the entire family leans closer with a suspense that feels almost ceremonial. The taste is delicate, richer than anything else you've had in days, and you understand instantly why even a single egg could lift spirits, sweeten tempers, and renew faith that winter would eventually pass. Superstitions cling tightly to these small orbs of life. Some villagers tucked the first egg of the year under the threshold to protect the home. Others dyed eggs long before Easter customs took shape, combining food and symbolism in ways that blurred the line between nourishment and hope. Tonight the eggs turn simple food into a feast, and the children lick their bowls with a joy so bright that for a moment the frost on the windows seems less like a threat and more like decoration. As the night deepens again, you walk outward to the final household on this frozen path, where the smell that greets you is neither meat nor grain nor herb, but something rich, soft and essential: fat, butter wrapped and buried in cool places, lard stored in clay jars, both treated with the reverence of treasure because in winter they are precisely that. One spoonful of lard can turn cabbage into comfort. One smear of butter across coarse bread can transform monotony into indulgence. Scholars argue endlessly about how much dairy peasants truly had. Some say most was given as rent. Others claim goats and hardy cows ensured steady supplies. But in this home the answer lies plainly in the jars stacked tenderly near the hearth. The mother melts a lump of lard into a pan, and the sizzle it makes as it meets the heat is almost musical, a soft crackling sound that promises warmth inside the body long after the fire cools. When onions and cabbage hit the pan, the aroma blooms instantly, filling the room so richly that even your clothes seem to absorb the fragrance. You take a bite later and feel the unmistakable strength that fat provides, a slow-burning fuel that carries villagers through the exhausting tasks of fetching water, chopping firewood and trudging miles through snow. And then, like a small miracle tucked into a dark corner of the room, you notice wheels of cheese aging under cloth, pale and firm with cracked rinds and hidden depth. Cheese is summer preserved, a way to hold the green warmth of grazing fields through the long months of winter. Whether stored in ash, rubbed with herbs, or wrapped in nettles to chase away mold, each wheel is a promise carved in time. With one slice you taste the memory of sunlight, the echo of pasture grass, the gentle warmth of animals whose milk carried families through the hardest days. You step back into the open air again, the cold sharper now yet strangely softened by the warmth you've gathered in these cottages, and you realize something profound. Winter survival here is not a single act, not one heroic gesture, but a collage of tiny triumphs: snared rabbit, under ice fish, a single egg, a smear of butter, a scrap of smoked meat, a handful of nuts, a pinch of herbs. Every bite is a negotiation with fate. Every meal is a quiet prayer. Every winter evening is a line drawn gently between endurance and hope. You follow a faint golden scent through the snow-soft silence, something warmer and sweeter than anything you've encountered so far, and as you push open the crooked door of the next cottage, you realize immediately what treasure lies inside. On a small wooden table sits a clay pot wrapped in cloth, its rim sticky and glistening ever so slightly, and the family gathers around it with a reverence normally reserved for relics. This is honey, the closest thing medieval peasants had to sunlight in a jar, a sweetness so rare and precious in winter that even adults look at it with childlike awe. The father lifts the lid and the aroma drifts out slowly, thick and golden, as if the air itself has remembered summer for just a moment. Before sugar ever found its way into northern Europe, honey was the only sweetness available, harvested from bees kept in wicker skeps or hollowed logs. The process equal parts courage and prayer. Bees were cherished and feared, creatures of order and mystery, and villagers risked stings, smoke, and superstition to gather this amber glow before the cold shut everything down. He dips a wooden spoon into the pot and lets a thin stream drizzle over a slice of dark bread, passing it to the youngest child with a ceremony so gentle you feel you should lower your head in respect. The child licks slowly, savoring it with wide eyes, and you understand at once why honey was kept hidden away and rationed with care. In winter monotony, where every flavor is earthy or salty or sour, honey is a miracle, warm, bright, alive. Scholars still argue whether peasants kept bees widely or whether most honey went directly to lords as rent, leaving only scraps for those who harvested it. But tonight the debate dissolves into the quiet joy on these children's faces as the mother now stirs a single spoonful into a pot of porridge over the hearth. Instantly the smell changes, becoming fragrant in a way nothing else you've smelled this winter could ever match. You take a bite, and the sweetness softens everything. The grain, the smoke, the fatigue. It feels like sunlight slipping into your chest. Honey is more than flavor here. It is medicine, mixed with herbs to soothe sore throats, dabbed on cuts to speed healing, stirred into hot ale to calm coughs. Some villagers believed honey carried divine protection, that bees themselves were messengers, and so they told their hives about births, deaths, and marriages as if the bees were part of the family. Hives were draped with cloth during funerals, so the bees would not fly away in grief. A superstition, yes, but also a sign of deep affection, a reminder that even tiny creatures had a place in the fragile fabric of survival. Before the pot is sealed again and tucked high on a shelf out of reach, you lick a bit of honey from your finger, and the sweetness lingers long after you step back out into the cold night, a kind of emotional warmth humming beneath your ribs. As you move through the snow, you pass a grove of bare trees, their branches curled like brittle fingers, and beneath them the forest floor holds another quiet gift from autumn, nuts and dried fruit stored against the cold. A farmer kneels at the base of an old hazel tree, brushing aside leaves to gather a few forgotten hazelnuts. Their shells are cold and rough in your hand, but inside waits a burst of energy dense enough to keep a body moving when meals are thin. Later in the cottage, the mother cracks hazelnuts with a stone, dropping the kernels into simmering porridge. The smell becomes warm, nutty, earthy. A small change, but in winter even the smallest change is a blessing. The children lean over the pot eagerly, and when they finally taste it their faces brighten as if they've just discovered a new holiday. Scholars debate whether dried fruits like sloes or crab apples were common or rare, but archaeological pits show seeds scattered everywhere, evidence that peasants gathered and dried whatever the land offered. A sack in the corner of the room holds walnuts and dried berries shriveled and dark. Their flavor is sharp, almost electric against your tongue, a reminder that not all winter food is dull. In some villages acorns were leached and ground into flour to stretch out bread, a bitter but necessary trick in hard times. You chew one now and imagine the hours of boiling needed to tame its harshness. Hunger is a powerful teacher of patience. A curious folk belief comes to mind. Hazelnuts were thought to bring wisdom, dried sloes to heal fevers, and crab apples to guard against winter spirits. Whether science or solace, such ideas helped people feel less helpless in the long months of cold. You walk on, and a new smell curls around you, sharp and green, a fragrance that doesn't belong to winter at all, but survives it through human stubbornness. Inside another cottage, bundles of dried herbs hang from rafters. Thyme, dill, parsley, mint, wild garlic. They crumble easily to the touch now, fragile as old parchment, but their scent remains stubborn and bright. Into the pot they go, a pinch here, a handful there, and suddenly a bland barley stew becomes layered with flavor, a small miracle wrought by memory and foresight. The grandmother waves a sprig of rosemary in the air, muttering about bad humors and restless spirits. And you smile because you've seen this before, how food, medicine, and superstition blur into one thing in the dim corners of winter. Scholars debate how much truth lay behind these herbal remedies. Garlic to fight infection, sage for sore throats, nettle tea for strong blood. But science aside, these practices kept fear at bay and gave people something to believe in when belief was sometimes the only thing standing between them and despair. When you taste the herb-laced stew, you feel warmth ripple through you, not just from the heat, but from the sense that humanity, even in its harshest chapters, always finds ways to season survival with meaning. But not all moods in the village glow with such gentle warmth. When you step into the next cottage, the air feels heavy, the smell is sharp. Onions. Everywhere, baskets of them. Onions stored carefully since autumn. Onions hung in braids near the rafters. Onions rubbed onto doorways in whispered rituals meant to keep sickness away. They sting your eyes as the mother chops them, and you blink through the tears, realizing that this pungent vegetable is a pillar of winter life. Onions soften quickly in stew, blending with barley and cabbage into something almost rich, almost sweet. You chew on a raw slice at the insistence of a child, and feel fire burn through your mouth before settling into a deep, unexpected warmth. Onions treat coughs, soothe earaches, disinfect wounds. Some villagers cut them in half and left them on windowsills to draw out illness, throwing away the blackened bulb in spring, convinced it had absorbed winter's danger. Superstition, maybe, but also comfort. The family eats quietly, and the baskets are covered again with cloth, their precious cargo tucked away like gold coins. But then you enter another cottage, and the mood shifts again, darker than any winter evening so far. A sack of grain sits open on the table, half empty, its edges soft and slumping like tired shoulders. The father runs his hands through the kernels, staring silently at the dwindling supply. The children watch him, wide-eyed, sensing the tension. This is the moment medieval families dreaded the reckoning. How much grain remains? Will it last? How much must be handed over as rent, tax, tithe? Grain is food, yes, but it is also obligation, debt, currency. A kernel eaten is a kernel not given. A sack saved is a sack the steward might question. Some years bring plenty, others bring hunger, and in some years famine. The father grinds part of the grain into flour, the sound of the millstone slow and tired. The resulting flour is dark, gritty. There will be no soft white bread here, only dense loaves that fill but do not comfort. As you watch the family divide the dough into careful portions, you feel the fear in their silence. Winter is no longer a season, it is an adversary with teeth. Stories of famine still echo here. Years when crops failed, when people boiled nettles and birch bark, when children grew hollow-eyed, when neighbours were buried under thin blankets of snow. Scholars argue how often such famine struck, but the emotional truth is the same. The memory of hunger lives longer than hunger itself. Tonight the parents sit awake after the children sleep, the fire low, the sack of grain between them like a question neither dares answer. You step back outside and the cold embraces you sharply, as if the winter itself has overheard these whispered worries and wishes to remind you of its power. The bells of the parish church toll faintly across the frozen air, each note drifting like a pale ribbon above the rooftops, and you follow their echo into the village square where the snow has been trampled into a dull, packed surface by dozens of weary boots. People move slowly, wrapped in wool cloaks patched so often that the original fabric is a mystery. Yet today there is a quiet hum beneath their tired steps, a sense of anticipation that cuts through the cold like a thin beam of light. It is a saint's day, a rare holy occasion when the church opens its doors not only to the soul but also to the stomach. Inside the stone church, the air is warmer than the cottages, thick with incense and smoke, and the unmistakable aroma of roasted meat. The scent hits you with almost physical force, rich and fatty and indulgent, the kind of smell that would make even the strongest-willed peasant swallow hard against a sudden wave of longing. Church feasts, recorded time and again in medieval chronicles, were the bright interruptions in an otherwise monotonous and sparse diet. When the calendar marked a holy day, villagers gathered for a meal that reminded them, just briefly, what abundance could taste like. Children press forward toward the long trestle tables set up beneath stained glass windows blurred by frost, their small hands clinging to wooden bowls polished from generations of use. A priest blesses the food with a sprinkle of holy water, murmuring Latin phrases that drift upward like steam, and then he begins slicing portions of mutton onto hunks of dark bread. The meat glistens, hot juices soaking into the coarse loaf, and villagers inhale sharply, as though even the smell adds warmth to their bodies. You take a seat among them, and when your portion arrives, a modest cut of roast fatty at the edges, tender in the middle, you feel the same strange mixture of gratitude and disbelief they do. One bite, and your senses flood with richness that feels almost unreal after days of barley and cabbage. The warmth radiates down your throat into your chest, thawing a space inside you that you didn't realize had grown cold. Laughter rises around you, thick, genuine, full-bellied laughter, as neighbors exchange hushed gossip and old stories. Even those with hollow cheeks and tired eyes smile now, just for tonight, as if the feast itself has granted them a temporary reprieve from fear. Historians debate how generous these feasts truly were. Some say they provided real relief. Others argue they offered only small portions and symbolic comfort. But watching the villagers now, the debate feels irrelevant. A child licks grease from her fingers as if savoring a miracle. An elderly woman closes her eyes around a mouthful of warm broth, whispering a prayer of thanks not for the saints but for the brief mercy of fullness. One man saves half his portion to take home to a sick relative. Another carefully pockets bones to boil later into broth, because nothing, absolutely nothing, is wasted in this world. When the feast ends, the priest ensures that leftover bones go to the poorest families. They will be boiled again and again for thin soups, their marrow drawn out until even the essence of flavor is gone. In some villages, bones were hung over doors as charms against famine or sickness, talismans carved from desperation rather than faith. Yet tonight they are tokens of hope, proof that the church recognizes the weight of winter and offers whatever relief it can. You step outside again into the cold night. and the church square is quiet once more, candles guttering in the windows, scraps of food already gathered into baskets to be carried home. The glow of the feast lingers in the air, a fragile warmth that clings to the village like breath on cold glass. Families walk slowly back to their cottages, huddled close, and you sense that even the stars overhead have softened their brightness out of respect. But in the following days, the square transforms into something entirely different. A winter marketplace, rough and chaotic and vital in every sense. Snow is shoveled aside and straw scattered on the ground to keep boots from slipping. Makeshift stalls appear, planks balanced on barrels, cloth draped over poles, and villagers gather to trade whatever they can spare. A fisherman unwraps slabs of salted herring, their smell sharp enough to cut through the cold air. A woman displays carefully knitted mittens, hoping to exchange them for beans or barley. A man pours dried peas into a wooden bowl, offering them to anyone with a jar of lard to spare. Value here is measured not in luxury but in necessity. Calories, warmth, survival. You drift through the stalls. A child tries trading hazelnuts for a scrap of leather. A farmer sprinkles ash over his turnips to ward off rot and perhaps to deter curious hands. The cloth merchant shakes out bolts of rough wool, and a woman trails her fingers across them with longing before walking away empty-handed. Some families barter, some plead, some walk home with less than they hoped. Scholars argue endlessly over the fairness of these markets. Some claim they kept the poor alive through ingenuity. Others insist prices made essentials unreachable. Yet, looking around, you understand the truth lies in the middle. These markets were lifelines, but fragile ones. One bad bargain, one harsh winter, one greedy merchant could shift the balance toward hunger. But hunger does not always wear the face of thin cupboards or empty bowls. Sometimes it wears the face of power. A few days later, you find yourself stepping into another cottage where the atmosphere is heavier than the cold outside. A sack of grain sits by the door, tied, sealed, ready, not because it will feed the family, but because it must be given away. Grain is rent. Grain is tax. Grain is tithe. It doesn't matter that the family is hungry. It doesn't matter that the children's portions have shrunk. The steward will arrive by morning with his ledger and his calm, unyielding voice. What is owed must be paid. The father stares at the sack, jaw clenched, shoulders slumped. The mother looks away, unable to watch the pile shrink. The children watch from the shadows, tense and silent. Medieval chronicles record this tension over and over again. Peasants handing over grain that would have fed them. Women hiding flour under floorboards. Officials prodding dirt floors with iron rods to find hidden stores. Lords adjusting dues only rarely. Churches rarely lenient. Obligations pressing down like frost on already fragile households. A few families tried clever tricks, mixing husks into tithe grain, baking the worst flour into loaves for the steward. But such acts were dangerous, punishable, and yet necessity makes rebels quietly out of almost everyone in winter. You taste the bread baked tonight, knowing part of it will be gone by morning. It is dense, sour, and strangely bitter, not because of the ingredients, but because of what it costs this family. Food is not just fuel here, it is sacrifice, it is submission, it is the quiet erosion of dignity beneath the weight of obligation. Outside, frost creeps along the edges of cottage walls, and you see a cart already waiting near the manor road. Tomorrow it will be loaded with grain that came not from abundance, but from fear. Later that evening you step into a neighbouring cottage, hoping for warmth, and instead you find work, the kind of work that shapes winter survival more than any harvest or hunt. The women of the household move with slow, steady purpose, stretching scraps into meals, turning stale bread into casseroles layered with cabbage, grinding dried peas into coarse flour, boiling bones until they dissolve into gelatin. Their hands carry the memory of generations, and their labour is the quiet backbone of the village's endurance. It is recorded again and again in household accounts. Women preserved the food, protected it, planned it, stretched it, and saved families from starvation with nothing more than patience, creativity, and a worn wooden ladle. Scholars debate how much freedom medieval women truly had, but here the truth is clearer than any argument. Without them, winter would win. A daughter grinds peas with a stone until they are powder fine. Another scrapes the last bits of fat from a clay pot to flavour tomorrow's stew. The mother dunks stale bread in hot broth and layers it with onions and cabbage in a clay dish, transforming scraps into something that smells richer than the ingredients should allow. Even the bones from last week's feast are boiled again tonight, their marrow coaxed out in a last gift of warmth. You sit quietly and watch, realizing that in this world survival is not heroic. It is domestic, repetitive, slow, and sacred in its own way. And still, the deepest shadow looms. There is a word spoken only in hushed tones here. A word that chills these cottages more than any wind can. Famine. A memory. A fear. A ghost that sits at the table even when bowls are full. You sit for a moment in that dim cottage watching the women scrape the last bits of marrow from the pot. And as the fire hisses softly beneath the kettle, you begin to understand why famine, true famine, was spoken of only in lowered voices, because famine was not just a lack of food, it was a slow and deliberate unravelling of life, a thinning of bodies and spirits that crept into a household one cold week at a time, and every family in this village carries the memory of it like an inherited scar, something passed down through stories whispered at night when the children are supposed to be asleep. But always listen anyway. You step back outside into the brittle air and follow the faint glow of a lantern toward another cottage, where elders gather around a table not for a meal but for remembrance, their hands folded, their eyes cast downward as they speak of winters long ago when the rain did not stop for months, when the grain sprouted and rotted in the fields, when cattle sank in mud up to their bellies and died with their hooves trapped, when parents dug through half-frozen ground for nettles and roots and bark because the granaries were empty and the sky gave no mercy. And even though centuries have passed, the stories have not softened at all. They speak of bread stretched with ground tree bark until it tasted like bitterness itself, of families boiling weeds again and again until the water took on the colour of old tea leaves, of mothers chewing roots before giving them to their children, so the little ones wouldn't choke on the fibrous strands. And as you listen, you feel the room tighten with the weight of suffering shared across generations. One old woman's voice cracks as she recalls her grandmother telling of the Great Famine of 1315, when the rains swallowed Europe and entire villages spent weeks living on what scraps they could gather, when dogs and cats disappeared from streets, not because they ran away, but because desperate families made impossible choices, when even the nobility thinned out, and the churches rang bells for funerals daily, their towers echoing with the sound of a continent struggling to hold itself together. Scholars debate the true toll of those years. Some say a tenth of the population was lost. Others argue the numbers are exaggerated, but the exact number does not matter to the people sitting in this cottage tonight, because famine to them is not statistics or parchment records. It is memory, raw, jagged, unhealed memory, woven into lullabies, proverbs, and warnings that parents whisper to their children so they will never take a crust of bread for granted. As the stories dissolve into silence, you feel a kind of pressure inside the room, a realization that famine is not a chapter closed long ago, but a shadow that still lingers at the threshold of every cottage, because winter always demands its price, and even a good harvest can be undone by one flooded season or one failed seed. You look at the children curled on the floor, listening quietly with wide eyes, learning the lesson their elders learned through pain, that survival is not a guarantee, but a fragile thread that can snap with one storm, one sickness, one week of bad luck. You step outside again and the night has grown even colder, the frost thickening along windowsills like a warning etched in white, and as you pass the church on your left the bells hang silent, now heavy and dark, as if resting after carrying the weight of too many stories. Your boots crunch through snow as you approach the village square where daylight usually brings the bustle of trade, but at night the stalls sit empty, their shadowed shapes reminding you that the market is not merely a place of exchange. It is a lifeline without which winter would crush the villagers outright. Each stall during the day pulses with the quiet desperation of people trading beans for wool, cloth for fish, labor for grain, and you recall how earlier you saw a child offer a handful of hazelnuts for a scrap of leather to make shoes for her brother, and only now do you realize how profoundly symbolic that moment was. Forest food being traded for man-made warmth, hope bartered against necessity, life arranged one small compromise at a time. But the market is only one side of the winter economy. The other side is colder, harsher, and enforces its will without negotiation. As you make your way toward the manor road, you see a cart parked beneath a half-dead elm, its wooden boards dusted with snow, its wheels frozen in place until morning, when the steward will come to collect grain from the cottages, and in the dim moonlight the cart looks less like a tool, and more like a predator waiting patiently for its prey. Tomorrow it will be filled with sacks of barley and rye, taken not from abundance but from the mouths of families who can scarcely afford the loss. Yet the system demands tribute regardless of hunger, and the Lord's granary will swell even as the villagers' cupboards hollow. You walk back toward the cottages and find one where a dim candle glows behind the shutters. You slip inside to see a family sitting around a table where a single small dish of pottage still steams, but the parents do not eat. Their children finish the bowl, their cheeks pink from heat, their bellies just full enough to sleep a little easier tonight. But the mother and father sit silently, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the door as if they expect the steward to enter at any moment. They have already set aside a portion of grain in a sack by the threshold, tied neatly, ready to be surrendered even though their own stores grow perilously low. It is one thing to fear hunger from nature, it is another to fear it from obligation, yet this is the reality of their winter. Hunger is not always caused by cold or poor harvests. Sometimes it is caused by the weight of someone else's rights over their labor. You feel the tension in the air tighten as the candle flickers lower, and you realize how much psychological pressure winter placed on peasants, how much of their energy went not into gathering food but into guarding it, stretching it, defending it from spoilage, theft, or forced obligation. The children yawn, unaware of the calculations swirling in their parents' thoughts. Whether the grain will last, whether the steward will take more than usual, whether the next week will bring sickness, whether spring will come early or late. In this cottage, the air feels thick not only with smoke but with fear, the silent, cautious fear of families who live one small misfortune away from hunger. As you step back into the icy darkness, your breath rising in long white clouds, you realize that winter is not merely a season in medieval life. It is a test of resourcefulness, of endurance, of hope, and you begin to understand that every humble meal you have tasted so far is not just food but strategy. Every crumb counted, every spoonful measured, every story told around the fire, a lesson, a warning, a reminder that survival is a communal effort stitched together through memory, fear, and determination. You walk farther down the narrow lane where snowdrifts have piled like pale dunes against the wattle and daub walls, and as you move toward the churchyard, the solemn accounts of famine still linger in your mind, shaping every breath you release into the cold air. The village is quiet now, but not with the peaceful silence of people at rest, rather with the tense stillness of a community waiting, listening, counting the days until the worst of winter loosens its grip. The light spilling from one cottage catches your eye, a faint amber glow trembling behind the shutters, as if the flame inside is fighting as hard as the family to survive the long, frigid night. And when you push the door open, you find a cluster of villagers gathered around a small table, trading news as if exchanging warmth. Their voices overlap in low murmurs about the next market day, about rumors of wolves near the forest line, about the steward's visit tomorrow, about whether the church will hold another feast before Lent, because in winter every scrap of information matters, Every whisper of opportunity or danger is folded into the daily strategy of staying alive. You sit with them for a moment as they recount how the last winter market unfolded. The stalls buzzing with desperate barter, the smell of dried fish cutting through the air like a sharp reminder of the sea's distant generosity. Merchants from nearby villages dragging carts laden with coarse salt, old wool, cracked pottery, and beans shriveled down to half their original size. The villagers speak of prices rising with each passing week, of hands trembling as they weigh whether to trade cloth for a sack of peas, or keep the cloth to mend torn sleeves, because both hunger and cold are relentless adversaries, and one cannot be sacrificed entirely to satisfy the other. They speak of quarrels sparked by misunderstandings over grain measures, of alliances formed when families pooled resources to buy a single salted herring to stretch into a stew, of the way the marketplace, bleak and draughty under the grey winter sky, becomes the place where hope is traded in tiny increments, one ladle of beans at a time, one bundle of firewood, one promise to repay a debt when the lambing season comes. And then someone mentions the coming saint's feast, and the room brightens ever so slightly the way frost glitters under a brief shaft of sunlight, because church feasts are not merely meals, they are emotional lifelines, moments when the monotony and weight of winter ease for a few blessed hours. You can almost see the memory behind their eyes. Trestle tables laden with roasted mutton dripping hot fat onto dark bread, copper cauldrons filled with root vegetable stew, enriched by the rare presence of bone marrow, children staring wide-eyed and breathless as steam rises from the feast like a warm promise, strangers becoming neighbors again as they pass bowls and trade stories, old grudges temporarily disarmed by the mercy of shared abundance. Historians argue about whether church feasts offered true relief or mere symbols, but the villagers themselves know the truth. One night of fullness can sustain the spirit for many days of hunger, and in winter it is the spirit, not only the body, that must be fed to endure. When you leave that cottage, the cold seems sharper, the silence heavier, the frost thicker on the eaves, yet the memory of the villagers' conversation stays with you, casting a faint warmth as you approach the manor road, where a long, dark shape emerges against the snow, a wagon, parked beneath an ancient oak, whose branches creak like old bones in the wind. The wagon stands ready for the steward's morning round, its wheels rimmed with ice, its boards stiffened by frost, and as you draw closer, you notice the faint marks of previous loads, scratches where sacks of grain scraped the wood, stains from spilled barley, remnants of a winter ritual as ancient as feudal obligations themselves. This wagon is the vessel through which the Lord's rites manifest physically in the village. Tomorrow it will take away food that could have filled bowls, warmed children, eased worry, but instead will be carried to the manor's storerooms, where abundance gathers in piles far beyond what any one household needs. Yet even as you contemplate this imbalance, you hear footsteps behind you, and turning, you see the parish priest walking slowly through the snow, his cloak wrapped tightly around his shoulders, his breath coming in clouds that drift upward like whispered prayers. He greets you with the quiet dignity of a man accustomed to bearing both authority and burden, and he speaks softly of how the church prepares its winter rituals, blessings over granaries, prayers for protection against hunger, the collection of tithes that weigh on peasants, yet also supply the resources that allow the church to host feasts and offer charity. He speaks of the tension he feels between duty and compassion, between doctrine and the reality of hunger in the cottages he visits at night, between the command to collect and the desire to give. His words are long, slow, and deeply human, and you sense that in this bleak season the priest's role is not only to lead prayers, but to serve as a fragile hinge holding together two worlds that often pull in opposite directions, the world of spiritual hope and the world of bodily need. As you continue your walk, the moon climbs higher, cold and distant, and you follow a thin footpath that winds between cottages toward a small outbuilding near the forest's edge. Inside, you find a group of women tending to tasks that seem humble but carry immense weight, straining yesterday's broth through cloth to catch every last droplet of fat, drying the peels of onions to use later for flavor, stirring a pot where stale bread has been softened in broth and layered with scraps of cabbage, transforming what would otherwise be discarded into a meal that stretches the illusion of abundance just a little further. Their movements are patient, rhythmic, almost ritualistic, shaped by generations of practice and honed by necessity, and you begin to understand that winter survival is not achieved through heroic acts, but through these repetitive, intimate gestures, hands sorting beans by candlelight, fingers pinching salt one grain at a time, feet trudging through snow to gather firewood, voices murmuring to children that tomorrow will bring something warm to eat. You notice the oldest woman scraping the bottom of the stew pot with a wooden spoon to collect the congealed fat that has hardened there, lifting it gently into a small clay jar to save for the next day's cooking. And you realize that winter survival is a mosaic of small salvages, tiny rescues, and incremental victories. In the corner, a daughter grinds dried peas with a stone, her arms tired but steady, as she turns them into a coarse meal that will thicken tomorrow's broth. And beside her, another child gathers bits of charcoal from the hearth's edge, saving them to help light the fire in the morning, so the family can conserve precious kindling. These acts are quiet, almost invisible, yet they are the difference between hope and despair, between enduring winter and being consumed by it. Stepping outside once more, you feel the night closing in, deeper and colder than before, and you walk through the village in a long, reflective silence, realizing that winter is not a single struggle but 1,000 small ones layered together. The hunger that sharpens slowly, the obligations that drain steadily, the memories of past famines that stalk quietly behind every thought, the frailty of food that must last until spring, the labor of women who turn scarcity into sustenance, the fragile bonds of community that keep despair at bay. And beneath all of that lies a simple foundation, the human will to survive, to endure, to hope even when the world is bitter and the nights unending. You continue walking along the frozen path, your boots sinking softly into snow that glows faintly under the moonlight. And as you move deeper into the village, the silence begins to shift into a woven tapestry of faint sounds, distant murmurs, the muted clatter of wooden bowls being stacked for the night, the soft exhalation of cattle in their byre, and somewhere, faint as a half-remembered dream, the gentle rise and fall of voices singing inside a cottage. You follow that sound like a thread through the darkness, until you come to a house whose windows glow with a warm, flickering light, and when you step inside, you find a small group of families gathered close to the hearth, their faces illuminated by fire and candle, their voices rising in a slow, melodic chant that seems to warm the room as tangibly as the embers themselves. These are the winter songs, the old songs passed from grandparents to parents to children, sung in a long, unbroken chain, stretching back to centuries before any of these villagers were born, songs that hold within them not only melodies but memories, legends, warnings, blessings, hopes, and you sense instantly why they are sung most fervently in the coldest weeks of winter. Music is more than comfort here. It is a spell, a binding force, a way to push back the darkness that presses against the walls, a way to tell themselves that no matter how heavy the snow or how thin the soup, they belong to something larger than fear. The voices rise softly, blending into a harmony that vibrates in your chest, and one elder begins a verse about St. Bridget's cloak spreading warmth across a frozen valley, while a younger woman joins in with a verse about St. Genevieve guiding her people through famine, and then a child, barely old enough to tie his own shoes, sings a line about saints keeping wolves away from the door. These songs, half sacred and half folklore, speak of protection, of light, of survival, and their power lies not in their literal truth, but in their emotional certainty. No matter how harsh the world becomes, something watches over them, something listens. Historians sometimes debate how widespread such singing was in medieval villages, but the truth you see here does not fit neatly into academic categories. This is not liturgical chant, nor simple entertainment, but an instinctive human response to winter's weight, a communal vow to keep hope alive. Even the children, whose bellies never quite feel full these days, sing with a quiet determination that softens the lines of worry etched on their parents' faces. In this flickering, smoky room, music becomes a rope thrown across the void, holding them all together. When the song ends, the families exchange small smiles, as if the act of singing has given them back a piece of themselves that winter tried to steal, and the grandmother begins preparing a simple ritual that is practiced in many villages at this time of year. She gathers a bundle of dried herbs, sage, rosemary, juniper, and tosses it into the fire, releasing a fragrant smoke that spirals upward, twisting through the air like a blessing. She murmurs a prayer, asking for protection against sickness, famine, and sorrow, and the smoke curls outward into the room, as if carrying her words toward every corner, filling the space with something warm and ancient. Some might call it superstition, others tradition, but here tonight it is medicine for the spirit, and everyone breathes it in with slow, grateful hearts. Outside, a gust of wind rattles the shutters, and the youngest child flinches, clutching his blanket tighter, but the grandmother simply gestures toward the herbs in the fire, and tells him softly that the smoke keeps the darkness away, that no hungry spirit or restless wolf can cross its boundary. You know, of course, that the smoke cannot truly keep danger at bay, yet in a world where so much is beyond control, this small ritual offers a thin but precious sense of agency, a feeling that the people inside this cottage have not surrendered entirely to winter's cruelty. When the families finally disperse into the night, pulling cloaks tight around their shoulders, you remain for a moment by the fire, watching the last curls of herb-scented smoke rise to the rafters, and you feel the warmth of their shared ritual settle into your bones like a quiet reassurance. You step outside into the cold again, and notice something subtle but unmistakable. The wind has softened, the snow crunches less fiercely beneath your feet, and a faint glow of moonlight dances across the rooftops, as if responding to the songs and prayers offered only moments before. You wander toward the edge of the village where the darkness feels deeper, thicker, more absolute, yet even here the signs of life persist stubbornly against the cold. A small barn door creaks open slightly, and inside you see a cow lying close to her newborn calf, its tiny body steaming in the cold air, its mother's breath rising in warm clouds as she nudges it gently toward her belly for milk. Birth, in the dead of winter, an event so fragile it borders on miraculous. The farmer kneels beside them, stroking the calf with straw, murmuring encouragement, his lantern casting a gentle circle of light around them. New life arriving when the world outside seems determined to freeze everything into silence. It is proof that winter cannot claim complete victory, that somewhere within this frozen landscape the pulse of spring has already begun. You step back from the barn and see the farmer's wife standing nearby with a bowl of warm mash, her face soft with relief, and she tells you in a hushed voice that a calf born in midwinter is a blessing, a sign that fortune has not forgotten them, because milk will fill the family's bowls in the months to come. She places her hand against the cow's flank and closes her eyes briefly, her breath forming a small halo in the cold air, and you feel, almost as strongly as she must, that this moment, this small spark of life, is enough to sustain the entire household's hope for another week, perhaps longer. As you walk back toward the center of the village, past cottages where candles flicker behind shutters like tiny constellations pinned to the dark, you realize that winter is not simply endured here. It is negotiated through countless gestures of resilience, songs that soften the night, rituals that soothe fear, small miracles like the birth of a calf, and the shared belief that even in the harshest season the world still holds room for warmth, for light, for survival. The wind drifts quieter now as you make your way toward a cluster of cottages where faint murmurs seep through the cracks in the timbered walls, and you sense that inside these modest homes another winter ritual unfolds, one far less formal than church feasts or sung prayers, but just as vital for survival. a ritual woven not from doctrine or superstition, but from the simple, stubborn kindness of people who have nothing to spare yet share anyway. You step into one such cottage, gently pushing aside a wool curtain that serves as a door, and you find three neighboring families crowded together around a fire that burns low but steady, their shoulders touching, their breath rising in pale clouds inside the room, because the cold is too deep for even the hearth to chase fully away. Yet they sit here with an ease that comes only from years of shared hardship. A mother ladles a thin stew from a pot not quite full enough yet, somehow enough for all present. She stretches it with boiled roots and stale bread, and no one complains because they know she herself has eaten little today. A father silently hands a spoon to a visiting child whose own family ran out of porridge 2 nights ago. He does this without comment, without ceremony, as if it is the most ordinary thing in the world, though you understand that in a winter this harsh it is anything but ordinary. It is generosity like this, quiet, unspoken, almost secret, that prevents families from collapsing under the weight of hunger, and though historians debate how widespread communal sharing was among medieval peasants, the truth you witness now cannot be argued. When survival hangs by a thread, that thread is often held in many hands at once. Children huddle together on hay-stuffed mats, wrapped in patched blankets, whispering stories about saints and monsters, mixing fear with fascination. One little boy describes the frost spirit said to roam the fields at night, tall as trees with eyes like ice shards, and his sister counters with a story she heard from her grandmother about a kindly ghost who brings warmth to cottages that sing winter songs before bed. The adults exchange small smiles at these tales, knowing full well the stories are wild inventions, yet they allow them to flourish because stories give children courage, and courage in a season like this is as nourishing as food. A curious ritual unfolds in the corner. 2 old women quietly exchanging small parcels wrapped in cloth. One hands over a handful of dried peas. The other offers a bundle of herbs tied with red thread, each item small, almost insignificant to the eye, yet precious beyond measure to the households that receive them. This kind of bartering, unofficial, unseen by the Lord's steward, forms the hidden economy of winter, the economy of trust, where debts are measured not in coins but in memory. "Take what you need," one woman murmurs. "Return it when the earth softens." It is a promise made without pressure, a pact sealed with nothing more than a nod, and yet it means everything. You step outside for a moment, letting the cold bite your cheeks, and you notice faint footprints in the snow leading from one cottage to another, narrow paths carved by countless nighttime visits, moments when someone knocked quietly on a door to borrow salt, or lend a loaf, or simply sit near a warmer fire for an hour. Some of these visits leave no spoken record, no written trace, and scholars might never know they existed. But you know, standing here under the pale light of the moon, that these invisible threads are the true architecture of the village, stronger even than stone walls or thatched roofs. You follow one of these paths to another cottage, where an elderly man tends a small fire. He sits alone, his back slightly bent, his hands trembling as he holds them over the flames. His children have long moved away. The winter has taken his wife, and hunger stalks him more boldly than it does the families nearby. Yet tonight he is not alone for long. 2 neighbours slip in through the door, carrying with them a small bundle of bread and a jug of weak ale, and they sit beside him, sharing warmth, sharing silence, sharing presence. They tell him about the newborn calf in the barn, about the herbal smoke in the previous house, about the children's stories, weaving him back into the life of the village, so he does not drift into loneliness, because loneliness in winter can be as dangerous as cold. One peculiar custom you notice among these nightly gatherings is the passing of a single candle flame from household to household, a symbol of communal endurance. Tonight the candle sits in the elder's window, its flame steady despite the draughts that slip through the shutters. Tomorrow it will be carried to another home, and the night after that it will travel again. Some say it brings luck, others say it keeps death from the door, but if you look closely you realize that what it truly represents is continuity. a promise that the village moves through winter together, not as isolated families, but as one living body. When you step back into the cold once more, you feel the atmosphere of the village shift around you. The night air is still biting, the snow still deep, the hunger still present, yet you sense something else coiling beneath the frost: resilience. Not loud, not triumphant, but steady, rooted, deep as the ancient oaks that wait beneath the snow for spring to return. As you walk along the moonlit path, your breath drifting upward like steam, you begin to understand why medieval villages survived winters that would break most people today. It wasn't only the salted meat or the berried turnips or the brewing ale. It was the way people gathered in half-dark cottages and shared whatever they had, the way stories filled children's ears when the pantry could not fill their stomachs, the way hands reached across thresholds with peas, herbs, or simply companionship. Winter tried to isolate them, but they refused to be isolated. Winter tried to break them, but they bent instead of breaking. Winter tried to silence them, but they spoke, sang, prayed, and remembered. The night deepens into that strange blue-black stillness that only winter can summon, the kind of silence so complete it feels almost supernatural, as if the whole village has slipped beneath a heavy blanket of snow and dreams. You follow a narrow footpath toward the outskirts where the cottages grow farther apart and the forest presses closer, its branches heavy with ice that glints faintly under the moon. Here, in the thin space between civilization and the wild, winter grows sharper, wilder, more alive. You can feel it in the air, how it seems to hold its breath, waiting. Inside one of the small timber cottages at the edge of the woods, you find a family gathered around a fire reduced to embers, its glow casting long shadows along the rough walls. They sit close together not only for warmth, but because tonight is one of the longest nights of the year, a night when stories turn darker, when the boundary between the living and the spirits feels thinner, when children are warned not to wander near windows or stare too long into mirrors because old tales say that winter spirits mimic those who look at them. The grandmother, wrapped in a wool shawl patched a dozen times, begins to tell a tale in a low, rhythmic voice, a story her own grandmother told her, and whose roots stretch back far beyond memory. She speaks of the Frostwight, a figure said to roam on nights exactly like this one, a tall, hollow-cheeked creature with fingers of ice, drifting silently across frozen fields, searching for homes where the fire has gone out, where laughter has died, where despair has taken root. Children lean closer, eyes wide, breath huddled inside their blankets. But the grandmother doesn't frighten them for cruelty. Her story has purpose. She tells them the wight cannot enter a home filled with warmth. Warmth of the hearth, yes, but more importantly warmth of the heart. Homes with singing, with whispering, with shared bowls and shared blankets, remain invisible to him. Only houses swallowed by silence invite him in. This is the unspoken lesson passed through ages. Community is protection, joy is a shield, togetherness is armor. As she speaks, the wind sighs against the door, and at that exact moment a draught slips into the room, making the candle flicker violently. The smallest child gasps, convinced the Frostwight has found them. But the father simply rises, adds one more piece of wood to the fire, and murmurs a blessing under his breath. The flames strengthen, the room brightens, and the fear dissolves like frost under sunlight. Ritual is comfort, and the smallest gestures, placing a log, crossing oneself, whispering a charm, carry immense power on nights like this. You look around the room and notice objects placed with deliberate care above the doorway: a sprig of dried juniper, a small iron knife, a braid of garlic. Each has meaning. Juniper to keep away wandering spirits, iron to repel malevolent forces, garlic to guard the body from sickness and the soul from fear. Scholars argue endlessly whether such rituals truly belonged to medieval peasant life or whether later folklore embroidered the truth. But here, in this cottage, the reality feels undeniable. These charms are not superstition. They are psychological fortresses built one fragile symbol at a time. When the story ends, the children finally settle, drifting towards sleep. But sleep itself in winter carries its own rituals. The mother checks the corners of the room to be sure no cold drafts sneak in. The father adjusts the wooden shutters. A bowl of water is placed near the hearth, not for drinking, but to test the night's bite. If it freezes solid by dawn, tomorrow's chores must be done carefully, and no one should stray too far into the woods where the ice cracks without warning. As the family prepares for bed, the grandmother begins yet another winter custom. She sprinkles a small handful of coarse salt at the threshold. Salt is precious, painfully precious, but this gesture is as old as the village itself. Salt symbolizes purity, protection, endurance. She murmurs a prayer as she spreads it. It is not unique to this home. Dozens of cottages in the village perform the same act tonight. Historians debate whether salt rituals were truly widespread in medieval rural life. Yet as you stand here watching her weathered fingers scatter those crystals, you understand something profound. The debate doesn't matter. The truth lived in homes like this, passed quietly, lovingly, stubbornly through generations. Outside, a wolf howls in the distance, a long, tremulous sound that vibrates through the walls. The children stir under their blankets, and the mother presses her palm gently to the youngest boy's back until he settles again. Wolves are real. So are hunger and cold. So is fear. But the stories, the rituals, the shared fire, these are also real, and together they create a kind of invisible barrier around the house, a collective belief that becomes as strong as iron in nights like this. When the family finally lies down on their straw-filled mattresses, bodies pressed close for warmth, you hear a final whisper, almost a prayer, almost a promise from the father. We make it to morning. We always do. His voice is not loud, it is steady, and the steady things are what keep people alive in winter. You step outside into the frozen world, the sky pale with stars, the moon spilling silver onto the snow. The forest stands like a silent cathedral of ice, immense and indifferent, and yet the village glows with dozens of tiny points of firelight, each one a testament to endurance. Somewhere behind you, laughter breaks briefly, soft, fragile, but unmistakable. It melts into the night, like warmth drifting upward. You walk on, deeper into the heart of the village, ready to witness the next layer of winter life. The dreams people carried, the omens they feared, the night terrors that visited hungry homes, and the curious belief that winter dreams sometimes foretold the first signs of spring. You move deeper into the night as the village settles into a hush, so complete it seems the snow itself is listening. Above you the sky hangs low and heavy, a pale wash of moonlight drifting across rooftops where frost glitters like crushed glass. This is the hour when exhaustion and hunger weave themselves into dreams, strange, vivid dreams that every medieval villager knows too well, because winter does not merely seep into bones, it seeps into the mind. You stop before a cottage whose chimney coughs a thin ribbon of smoke, and when you step inside you find a family already drifting between waking and sleep. The fire has burned low, leaving only a faint red glow beneath collapsing logs. And in that near darkness you hear soft murmurs, words spoken not to you, not to each other, but to whoever listens from the other side of sleep. A little girl tosses beneath her blanket, her cheeks flushed, not with warmth but with feverish dreams brought on by hunger and cold. Her grandmother kneels beside her, stroking her hair, whispering that the dreams of winter are always strange but never to be feared. And indeed, in medieval villages, dreams were not dismissed as nonsense. They were treated as messages, omens, warnings, sometimes even blessings. A dream of bread meant hope. A dream of wolves meant danger. A dream of green fields, even if impossible in January, was treasured like a sign that spring was already stirring beneath the frozen earth. The grandmother murmurs to the child, telling her a belief passed down through generations that winter dreams are brighter, sharper, more prophetic, because the soul sees more clearly in the cold. Scholars today might roll their eyes at such superstition, but here, watching the girl's restless sleep, you sense the grain of truth behind it. Hunger sharpens the senses. Fear makes the imagination vivid. Cold turns every sound, every flicker of shadow, into something alive. How could dreams not be sharper in a season like this? The father sleeps sitting upright against the wall, his back stiff, his head tilted forward in uneasy rest. Every few moments he mutters in his sleep, as if arguing with someone unseen. You listen closely and realize his dreams circle around the grain stores, counting sacks, opening empty chests, trying to bake loaves that crumble to dust in his hands. Food anxiety becomes its own kind of haunting, one that follows him even into the sanctuary of sleep. Historians may debate how often true famine struck, but the fear of famine was constant, shaping not just waking life but the dream world as well. In the corner, a teen boy jolts awake with a small gasp, sweat glistening on his forehead despite the cold. His mother asks what he saw, and after a moment he confesses he dreamt of a black-robed figure standing in the snow outside the cottage, tapping the window 3 times. She shivers slightly, because such dreams carry significance. In some regions, tapping dreams were believed to foretell illness, or a death in the village, or a late spring that would stretch hunger into April. Whether these beliefs have any basis in reality doesn't matter. What matters is that the villagers carry these stories in their blood. They cannot shrug them off. The mother moves to the small altar shelf near the hearth, a simple plank of wood holding a wooden cross, a dried sprig of rosemary, and a bowl of ashes left over from last year's Candlemas. She whispers a brief blessing over the sleeping boy, tracing a small cross in the air above him, a gesture meant to soothe the dream and guard him from whatever it foretells. Ritual here is not about certainty, it is about having something to do in the face of forces too large to name. It is a way of telling the dark, you may be vast, but we are not powerless. You step back outside, letting the cold slap your face lightly, and as you walk through the village you see other signs of dream fear. A bundle of ashes sprinkled near a doorway. A broom placed bristles up against a wall to confuse wandering spirits. A candle left burning in a window longer than usual. All these gestures, tiny and critical, form a shield against the strange terrors of winter nights. Further down the lane you discover a young couple sitting awake by their fire, unable to sleep. They trade stories of dreams they've had in winters past. A dream of a river turning to milk, a sign of pregnancy. A dream of a man without a face walking across frozen fields, a sign someone would arrive unexpectedly. A dream of snow falling indoors, a sign of loss or misfortune. They speak softly, not wanting to wake the baby sleeping between them, but also not wanting their voices to disappear entirely into the silence. The fire crackles in response, as if participating in the conversation. You sit with them for a while, letting their quiet words fill the room, and you realize something profound. Winter dreams are a language, a private one, a communal one, a coping mechanism and a belief system all at once. They help people make sense of hunger, of fear, of helplessness, turning the chaos of survival into stories the mind can hold. When you finally leave the cottage, the village is wrapped in a deeper stillness than before, but it no longer feels empty. It feels inhabited by countless dreams, some whispering warnings, others carrying hints of hope, all floating just above the snow like mist. And tomorrow, when dawn comes pale and late, the dreams will be shared, interpreted, laughed at, feared or cherished. For in winter, dreams are not meaningless, they are companions. The night drags on toward its coldest hour, that fragile window before dawn, when even the bravest souls feel the weight of darkness settle on their shoulders, and this is when the village enters its most vulnerable state. Hunger sleeps lightly, fear sleeps lightly, and outside the world sharpens into a silence as brittle as ice. You follow a narrow track between cottages until you reach a dim glow, an oil lamp swinging gently from a wooden post. A man stands beneath it, wrapped in a thick cloak, breath rising in heavy clouds. He is one of the night watchers, a role rarely discussed in chronicles but absolutely essential in isolated medieval villages. Not a soldier, not a guard in the way towns had guards, but a peasant chosen by rotation, responsible for listening to the night. Listening for wolves, listening for thieves, listening for spirits, some might say. His eyes scan the darkness, pausing at every rustle of wind, every creak of snow-laden branches. You stand beside him, and after a long silence he speaks in a low, hoarse voice. This is the hour when things that shouldn't walk, walk. You think he's joking, but he doesn't smile. Winter has taught him that danger does not always announce itself clearly. Wolves hunt closer to homes when hunger drives them. Desperate men steal food. Even the cold itself feels like a predator. He lifts his lantern, and its weak, flickering light casts long shadows across the lane. Snowdrifts swirl softly around you, and somewhere far off you hear it. The faint, almost delicate crunch of footsteps. Not human footsteps. Too light, too quick. The watcher tenses, gripping his wooden staff tighter, and whispers. But then his expression hardens. Fox means hunger. If foxes come, wolves follow. He moves a few paces forward to chase it off, tapping the ground with his staff. The fox darts away, a streak of red vanishing into the night. You walk with him as he circles the barnyards and storage sheds, the village's most precious spaces in winter. Some sheds store grain, others house root vegetables buried in straw. A fox could ruin a season's supply. A wolf could kill livestock. A human thief could doom a family. And so these small patrols, quiet, simple, almost invisible to history, become the thin line between survival and starvation. At one barn, you find a woman sitting wide awake with a heavy cloak around her shoulders, guarding the last goat the family owns. She refuses to sleep because wolves have been spotted twice this week. Her husband sleeps a few hours inside, but she hasn't slept properly in days. Yet she doesn't complain. Instead, she strokes the goat's neck, whispering reassurance as if comforting a child. The watcher greets her with a nod. No words exchanged. They both know the stakes. In another yard, you see something stranger. A man placing iron tools, sickles, hoes, broken old knives along the outer wall of his cottage. Metal, it was believed, repelled evil spirits and malevolent forces. Wolves fear noise, children fear spirits, adults fear hunger. Iron protects from all three, in one way or another. Scholars may dismiss these rituals, but standing here tonight you understand that fear needs a shape, and giving it a shape gives people power over it. As you follow the watcher toward the well, you hear a sudden thud, a loud, decisive sound. The watcher stiffens. You move cautiously toward the source and find the heavy lid of a storage pit slightly ajar, a place where carrots, turnips, and beets are kept through the winter. The watcher pulls the lid open and shines his lantern inside, and relief washes across his face. A large stone weight has simply slipped in the cold. Nothing stolen. Not tonight. Still, the scare reminds you how precarious life is here. One missing sack, one broken barrel, one animal gone, and an entire household teeters at the edge of hunger. You continue your circuit and find tracks in the snow. Human tracks, fresh, leading between two cottages and then vanishing near the old ale shed. The watcher's expression darkens. Not all winter threats come from outside the village. Hunger can twist decent people into thieves, and though punishment is harsh, desperation can be louder than fear. The watcher presses his lantern closer to the prints and studies them for a long moment. Finally, he shakes his head. "Child," he says, "too light for a grown man." He follows the tiny tracks and finds them leading to a neighbor's door, likely a child sneaking out for warmth or curiosity, not theft. He exhales in relief. But if a grown man had been out here, the night would be colder still. When you return with him to the center of the village, the lantern light shivers across the snow. The hour is late. The cold cuts deeper now, and inside the cottages people sleep uneasily, not because they are weak, but because winter forces a kind of half-sleep upon them. a readiness to wake at any sound. You realize something profound as you stand among the dark shapes of the homes. This village survives not because of food alone, not because of the fire alone, but because of vigilance, constant, exhausting vigilance. Someone always wakes early. Someone always sleeps lightly. Someone always stays by the door. Someone always walks the lanes at night. Winter is too strong to face alone. And as the watcher lifts his lantern one final time and says, "Almost dawn," you feel that strange shift in the air, cold but softer, dark but thinning, heavy but preparing to lift. Dawn does not arrive in a burst of gold here. It creeps, hesitates, presses its pale fingers against the horizon as if unsure it wants to touch this frozen world at all. The first light trickles into the village in a thin, almost reluctant glow, revealing roofs sagging under the weight of snow and chimneys, exhaling their first sleepy puffs of smoke. The air is so cold it feels sharp enough to carve itself into your lungs, yet the arrival of morning, any morning, is a small triumph in itself, because it means the village has survived another night. You follow the watcher to his cottage, where his wife already tends the fire, coaxing it back from embers. Sparks jump to life as she feeds it dry twigs. Her motions so practiced they feel like part of an ancient dance. In medieval life, mornings always begin with fire, not warmth, not food, but fire, because nothing else can happen until the flames rise. Without it, porridge cannot simmer, water cannot thaw, hands cannot move, and spirits cannot lift. She whispers a small blessing as the flames catch, not because she expects magic, but because habit and hope blur together in winter. You step back outside, and the village begins its slow awakening. Doors creak open, smoke thickens through the air. Children, bundled in wool so stiff it limits their movements, stumble into the snow to fetch water or gather kindling. Their faces are red, noses dripping from the cold, yet they move with surprising focus. Winter trains discipline early. A man emerges from his cottage carrying an axe, his breath pouring out in harsh bursts. His task today is gathering wood from the edge of the forest, and he knows the risks well. Frozen branches snap unpredictably, ice hides beneath the snow, wolves stalk silently through white drifts, but wood is life. A household without wood is a household without heat, without cooked food, without hope. You follow him for a moment toward the tree line, where frost clings to every branch like powdered glass. He swings the axe with steady, deliberate rhythm, each stroke sending a small shower of ice crystals into the air. The forest responds with hollow echoes, as if acknowledging the intrusion. This man cuts not vigorously but cautiously. He knows that one misstep, one slip, one injured hand could cost him everything. There are no doctors here, no second chances. Back in the village centre, a few families begin their morning chores. A woman breaks the thin layer of ice inside a bucket, scooping out the slush with her bare hands. She winces at the cold but continues because the animals must be watered. Another woman shakes straw bedding from the barn, scattering it in neat lines where sunlight barely reaches. The smell of hay, sour and earthy, rises into the air, mixing with the ever-present smoke. One cottage stirs with livelier noise. A young boy opens the door and calls softly to coax out the family's single cow. The cow hesitates, its breath steaming like a miniature fog, its hooves slipping on the frozen earth. Livestock are fragile in winter, too fragile. A cow that refuses to eat, freezes or injures itself can doom an entire family. So the boy speaks gently, almost pleadingly, guiding her into the weak sunlight. He pats her flank, grateful that she lives another day. In a nearby yard you find a different sight. A hen fluffs her feathers, pacing anxiously as the farmer checks for any eggs laid overnight. He lifts the basket with a reverence usually reserved for sacred objects. 2 eggs, small, pale, imperfect, but precious. The farmer closes his eyes briefly in gratitude. A single egg in winter is not just food, it's morale. It is proof that the world still gives back even in its harshest months. As morning widens across the village, you notice something else. The rhythm of footsteps grows steadier, the voices louder, the air less heavy. Winter mornings are paradoxical. They are bitter, punishing, grueling, but they carry a whisper of renewal. Every sunrise is a quiet victory over the night. Inside another cottage, a woman kneads dough slowly, pressing her palms into the dense mixture of flour and water. The bread will be hard, the loaf heavy, but the act itself is hopeful. Kneading bread is a declaration that the family intends to make it through the day. Across the lane, the oldest man in the village emerges from his home, leaning heavily on a carved walking stick. He surveys the snow, testing its depth with the tip of his cane. He nods once, satisfied, and begins his slow journey to the well. Routine is resilience. Even the elderly cling to patterns that anchor the day. A child chases a stray dog through the snow, laughing breathlessly, his voice breaking the fragile silence left from the night. And for a moment, just a moment, the village feels almost alive, almost warm, almost free of winter's tyranny. You stop and watch the scene unfold as the sun finally climbs higher. Not bright, not strong, but present. The houses, the smoke, the bundled figures, the steam rising from troughs and pots. It all becomes a mosaic of stubborn survival. Mourning in a medieval winter is not gentle. It is not leisurely. It is not comforting. But it is movement. And movement is life. And as the village settles into its daily hum, wood chopped, fires fed, animals tended, bread rising slowly in its cloth, you realize something profound. Winter is not one great battle, but 1,000 small ones, fought every hour, every morning, every frost-bitten breath. As the pale winter sun crawls a little higher, never warm, never generous, just present enough to remind the villagers that day still exists, the rhythm of daily labor begins to thicken through the air like smoke. Medieval winter days were not restful pauses between storms. They were slow-moving gauntlets, a constant negotiation between exhaustion and necessity, and every moment demanded effort, vigilance, and endurance. You follow a woman trudging through snow up to her shins, her breath short, her arms filled with a bundle of frozen laundry stiff as wooden boards. Washing clothes in winter isn't really washing at all. There is no flowing water, no soft fabrics, no warm rinse. Instead, garments are beaten on stones, scrubbed with handfuls of snow, and hung in the brittle wind until they freeze into rigid shapes. She cracks them like wooden planks before bringing them inside to thaw near the hearth. And as strange as it looks, the process works well enough. Cleanliness in winter is not a matter of comfort, it's a matter of preventing sickness. Inside a different cottage, a mother kneels beside her young daughter, rubbing her small feet with warm animal fat. Frostbite is an invisible predator, striking the very young and very old without warning. The child winces as feeling returns, but she doesn't complain. Medieval children learned early that pain was part of the season. The mother wraps the girl's feet in wool scraps, then layers them with a second pair of worn shoes, tying them tight with strips of leather. The girl will still feel the cold, but she will keep her toes. Near the center of the village, a young man repairs a cracked bucket. The cold splits wood as easily as it splits skin, and today his hands are bleeding from the effort. He dips his fingers inside a bowl of melted lard, watching the fat seep into the cracks of his dry knuckles. He doesn't flinch. It's too normal. Winter makes everyone's skin break. That's why lard isn't only for cooking. It's a remedy, an ointment, a shield. He wraps his fingers in strips of linen, takes a deep breath and keeps working. The bucket must hold water. There is no such thing as an optional task in winter. Behind him, 2 boys chase a runaway piglet across the snow. The creature squeals wildly, skidding across ice patches as the boys laugh and stumble after it. It's a rare burst of joy, almost comedic against the backdrop of hardship. But even this play is practical. A piglet loose in winter could freeze, get injured, or slip into a storage pit and ruin food. The boys eventually catch it, cradling it in their arms as they scold it gently like a naughty toddler. You notice something then. Beneath every moment of work, every laugh, every shout, there is fatigue, a deep, slow fatigue that sits behind the eyes of every villager. Sleep is never truly restful. Food is never quite enough. Cold is never fully defeated. It's a constant drain that steals energy with every breath, and yet the villagers push through it because the alternative is worse. A few houses down, you find an older man sitting on a low stool mending harness straps. His fingers move clumsily, half frozen, half arthritic, but he knows the work cannot wait. The donkey will need that harness for hauling firewood later. Without firewood, the hearth dies. Without the hearth, the family does not make it through the night. Every small item, strap, bucket, latch, hook, holds life together like stitches in a fraying garment. Nearby, a woman stirs laundry in a steaming cauldron using a wooden stick, her face flushed from the heat of the fire against the freezing air seeping in through the walls. She hums a slow tune, half lullaby, half prayer, while a toddler on the floor repeatedly tries to eat frozen snow tracked inside on someone's boot. She laughs, scoops the child up before frost settles on his lips, and wraps him in her shawl. Parenting in winter is a dance of constant rescue. As the morning stretches into afternoon, you see another scene typical of a winter's workday. A group of children gathering brushwood from the roadside. Their hands are numb, and their cheeks are raw, but they move with determination because brushwood is the easiest fuel to find and burn. Some villages allowed children to gather fallen branches even from the Lord's forest during winter months. A rare grace, but the children know to take only what is loose. Cutting living branches is poaching, and the penalties are steep. As you make your way across the village square, you hear a dull thud from a nearby cottage. Inside you find a man holding his foot, hissing through clenched teeth. A tool slipped. His toenail is blackened, the skin already swelling. His wife presses a cloth soaked in warm ale against the injury, a common makeshift remedy, and binds it tightly. There are no doctors here. A swollen foot means days of reduced work, and reduced work means less wood, less food, less heat. Every injury echoes outward through the entire household. Outside again, a group of women gather to break ice off the village well. They strike the surface with poles, working in rhythm, laughing through their exhaustion. Ice shatters in jagged sheets. They lift it out, scoop water into buckets, and carry them home across slippery ground, shoulders hunched from the weight. Water in winter is not a simple resource. It's an hour-long battle. And yet, amid all this struggle, a strange consistency appears. People keep moving, keep working, keep adjusting. Even the coldest medieval winter day has a heartbeat, a slow, stubborn, relentless rhythm that cannot be stopped. As afternoon light begins to thin and shadows lengthen across the snow, you feel the village exhale in weary unison. They have made it through another morning, another series of chores, another set of risks narrowly avoided. But the day is far from over. Soon the temperature will drop again. The sun will vanish. The fire will need tending. The evening meal must be prepared. Animals must be brought inside. Doors barred, windows shuttered, dreams waited for, fears kept at bay. As the pale afternoon light thins into a watery grey, the shadows of the cottages stretch long and crooked across the snow, and you can feel the entire village shifting into a different rhythm, the slow, careful preparation for night. Winter nights are not just hours of rest. They are tests, and everyone, from the oldest elder to the smallest child, knows that the hours after sunset are the most dangerous of all. You begin to hear it, a subtle change in sound, less chopping of wood, less chatter, more doors closing, more latches being checked, more footsteps hurrying home before the cold hardens into something rigid and unfriendly. A mother calls her children in from the yard. They drop their handfuls of twigs and rush inside, brushing snow from their wool hoods. The smell of wood smoke pours out of the doorway as she ushers them across the threshold. Firelight flickers behind her like a protective pulse. At another cottage, a man crouches beside his pig pen, coaxing the animals indoors. He whistles softly, tapping a bucket to guide them. The pigs hesitate. They remember the warmth of the day, but eventually they shuffle into the barn. Their breath fogs the air, in thick clouds. A barn filled with animals creates heat, and in many households the warmth of livestock becomes a secondary hearth. Without them, the nights would be colder, too cold. Further down the lane, an old woman shakes the bedding, fluffing the straw to make it warmer before nightfall. She spreads a wool blanket over it, humming a tune under her breath. Her fingers move stiffly but precisely. Straw isn't comfortable, but it insulates heat better than anything else peasants can afford. She checks the corners for drafts. Winter wind sneaks through the smallest cracks and stuffs them with old rags. You move toward a cottage where a young man is splitting the last of the day's collected wood. Each strike of the axe rings through the crisp air like a small, desperate prayer. He stacks the wood carefully in a pile near the door. Not too high, not too low, just enough to avoid having to go outside at night, unless absolutely necessary. Going out after dark is never wise. Not in winter. Not with wolves, thieves, and cold so sharp it has taken fingers and toes from those who lingered too long. Inside one home, a family gathers around the hearth for evening chores. A pot hangs above the fire, its contents simmering slowly. A stew of barley, onions, a few scraps of meat, and whatever vegetables survived the winter storage pits. The smell fills the cottage, earthy, smoky, comforting. Children watch eagerly as their mother stirs the pot, their eyes following every movement like hungry birds tracking a crumb. Dinner is not just nourishment here. It is reassurance. It is ritual. It is proof that today they have survived, and that tomorrow might be possible. The father breaks pieces of coarse bread, each portion measured carefully. He hands them around the table with a solemnity that feels almost sacred. Bread is never cut casually in winter. It is weighed, considered, rationed, treated like currency. Every crumb matters. When the stew is finally served, the family leans in close, warming their hands around the wooden bowls. Steam rises like a soft curtain between them. They eat slowly, savoring each bite, knowing that the warmth of the stew will carry them through the first hours of the night. A child slurps too quickly and yelps when her tongue burns. Everyone laughs softly, not loudly, not freely, because laughter is fragile in winter, but enough to carve a moment of humanity into the darkness. Meanwhile, in the cottage next door, an older man places a token amount of grain into a small bowl and sets it near the door. Some call it superstition, others hospitality to wandering spirits, but the truth is more complicated. Peasants often believed that sharing even a tiny offering with the unseen forces of winter helped keep the home safe. Hunger, spirits, luck, everything felt close in winter. Everything felt personal, and small gestures mattered. As dusk deepens into night, the final preparations begin. Windows are secured with wooden bars. Parchment-filled cracks are checked. The fire is stoked one last time, bringing the flames to a controlled brightness. Too little fire means cold. Too much fire risks burning down the cottage. Every decision must balance warmth and danger. You step into another home where a grandmother is teaching her grandson the old evening chant, half prayer, half rhyme. Its purpose is simple: to keep fear from taking root in the darkness. The chant speaks of warm bread, full granaries, kind weather, and safe dreams. He repeats it carefully, stumbling over a line or two, and she smiles, smoothing his hair as she finishes the verse for him. At the far edge of the village, the night watcher for the coming hours prepares a small lantern, trimming the wick, checking the oil, wrapping a thick cloak around his shoulders. His face is tired, bone-tired, but he will walk the lanes anyway, because someone must listen for danger while the rest sleep. His footsteps crunch the snow in slow, deliberate rhythms as he begins his patrol. Inside the cottages, families settle into their beds. Children curl together like bundled kittens. Parents lie side by side, their bodies angled toward the fading heat of the hearth. Silence descends, heavier than snow, thicker than wool, filling every corner of every room. A baby cries once, a dog barks once, a shutter rattles once, then quiet again. Outside, the moon rises above the frozen village. Every roof shines like polished stone. Every sound echoes with sharp clarity. Night has fully arrived. And as you stand in the center of the sleeping village, surrounded by fragile warmth and implacable cold, you feel the fragile balance of medieval winter life settle into place. Another day survived, another night begun, another gamble with darkness that every peasant must face. Night deepens into its coldest point, that silent, merciless hour when the fire burns lowest, when breath hangs unmoving in the air, when even the stars seem distant and indifferent. Inside the cottages the village sleeps, not peacefully, but with the brittle, uneasy sleep of people who know that winter is a guest who never shows mercy. And yet, despite the cold that squeezes the walls, despite the hunger that gnaws quietly at stomachs, despite the wolves pacing just beyond the tree line, something else lingers here too, a stubborn thread of hope, woven so tightly into daily life, it becomes indistinguishable from survival itself. You walk through the lanes one last time, feeling the absolute stillness settle over the village. The night watcher stands hunched at the far end, lantern faint, posture weary. He nods when he sees you, the gesture soft but full of meaning. Another night endured. You nod back. Words aren't needed. Inside a cottage where you spent an earlier part of the day, the fire has shrunk to glowing coals. A mother sleeps curled around her children, their small bodies tucked into the hollow of her warmth like animals in a den. Their breaths rise and fall in slow harmony. You watch them for a moment, noticing how the mother's hand rests instinctively on her youngest child, protective even in sleep. In another home, an elderly couple lies beneath a pile of wool blankets, their faces nearly touching, eyes closed, breaths shallow. The old man's fingers rest lightly on his wife's wrist, as if making sure the heartbeat he has known for 50 years still moves beneath her skin. Winter has taken much from them over the decades, but it has not taken tenderness. Across the village, a young couple sits awake, whispering by the fire. They speak about the coming spring, about the lambing season, about plans for sowing once the frost breaks. Their voices are tired but hopeful. Two people dreaming in defiance of the cold. They know that dreaming in winter is almost a form of rebellion. You step outside, and the sky shifts. The moon dims behind a thin veil of cloud, and a faint breeze stirs gentle, almost warm. You realize it's not warm at all, but compared to the still, frozen air of the hours before, it feels like a promise, a hint, a preview of something larger approaching. And then you notice it, a faint line of light on the horizon. Not dawn, not yet, but the earliest suggestion of dawn. The villages of medieval Europe did not count days by clocks, but by instinct, by breath, by the way night slowly surrendered. And right now the night is beginning to surrender. You walk toward the village well and look back at the cluster of cottages, small, fragile, imperfect, but alive. Smoke curls from a few chimneys as the earliest risers stir the fire. Somewhere a rooster crows, confused by the half-light. A dog stretches and shakes frost from its fur, and a baby begins to cry in the distance, not loud, just softly, but enough to signal that life continues. By the time true dawn reaches the village, the scene has transformed. Light filters between the rooftops, illuminating the snow in pale gold. You feel a shift, subtle but unmistakable. The shift that tells medieval villagers they have survived another night, that the balance between cold and warmth, hunger and strength, fear and endurance has tipped once again in their favor. Later, when the day fully breaks, people will gather wood, stretch dough, tend to animals, and barter small comforts with neighbors. They will face challenges again, perhaps greater ones than today. But for now, in this brief, delicate moment when yesterday's suffering has not yet met today's tasks, there is something like peace. You stand in the center of the village and listen. The sounds are quiet but full of meaning. A crackling hearth being coaxed back to life, the brushing of straw, the faint murmur of a prayer. These are not grand gestures. They are small ones. Yet in winter, small gestures are what keep the world from falling apart. And as the sun finally lifts itself free from the horizon, washing the village in weak but golden light, you feel the final truth settle over you. Clear, quiet, undeniable. Medieval people survived winter, not because they were stronger than us, not because they had better tools, not because the world was kinder, but because they clung fiercely to each other, to routine, to ritual, to hope. They understood that enduring the cold was not merely a physical act. It was a shared act, a communal act, a human act. And so the story ends the same way each winter day begins in a medieval village, with a fragile but victorious breath, a flicker of fire, and the certainty that together they will face whatever the next night brings.